Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. So guys, the OCG confirmed list has been out for a few days, and I think that it's starting to sink in among duelists. I think that a lot of players are starting to get on that horse. They're starting to test their ideas, get a feel for the format, and I believe that this is going to be a much slower format than we previously had, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. Just how happy I am at that.
Yes! Yes!
And just, you know, some of my thoughts about why this format is going to be slow and some of the benefits that we're going to have, you know, in contrast to the last format that we had that was relatively fast in my opinion. Okay, so first things first, we all know that last format was one where slower paced control decks had absolutely no chance. 90% of the time, unless that deck was Evil Swarm, and that's really because Ophion specifically countered what Dragon Rulers wanted to do, and you could also tech in copies of Eradicator Virus to help you against the Spellbook matchup. But outside of that, it seemed to be slim pickings. I mean, you either got ran over by the onslaught of dragons, backed by things like Super Rejuvenation and then the constant pluses from the dragons being banished. You know, if you ever try to use things like Bottomless Trap Hole or Deep Prison against the dragons themselves, that was obviously just a nightmare. And then you also had this other deck on the other side of the spectrum in spellbooks that seemingly always went off turn one. So, you know, it seemed like if you were running a slower paced control deck, you were always between a rock and a hard place. This format appears to be very different. For one, speed has actually returned to the control decks. The semi-limit on Pot of Duality never made any sense to me. With the card at 3, plus with OP go off turn 1, almost always decks severely hindered, control decks can actually flourish this format. You know, these decks need time to set up their key plays. I mean, they need time to get to their cards so that they can create their locks or so that they can get to the specific monsters they need, and Pot of Duality lessens that process immensely. And I mean, let's say that you're playing a traditional old pace or old school stun deck. Let's say you open with Pot of Duality and Card D. I mean, both of these cards are unlimited, so there's at least a pretty decent chance of that happening. Not only do you have 7 cards, so you're already in a +1 position, but you cycle through 10 cards in your first turn. I mean, that's a quarter of your deck. For a slow-paced control deck, that's pretty damn impressive. You know, you had your 6 cards in your opening hand, you got an extra card from Card D, and then you get to cycle through 3 more cards with Duality. I mean, you're just going to be in an advantageous position. You've got to see so many options. Chances are, if you needed to set something up, you're in a pretty good position to do so. The second important factor that I want to talk about is the return of the battle phase, and it almost feels like, where's it gone, you know? Last format, the battle phase was, well, it was just a shell of itself. I mean, it reminds me of when Insectors had 3 Hornet and 3 Dragonfly, and cards like Dimensional Prison and Mirror Force just weren't viable because any Insector player with half a brain just knew that I'm not going to attack in the back row. I'm just going to pop all your cards with Hornet, and then if you don't have any monsters, I'm just going to swing with everything, knowing that you really won't have a way of stopping me. And Dragon Rulers was very similar to that. You know, Dragon Rulers was a deck that rarely ever used direct monster to monster combat, with maybe the exception of Dracosac, because Dracosac could just pop everything. You could pop everything faster if you had the Scrap Dragon lock, and anything that you couldn't pop, you could just snatch steal with Big Eye. Spellbooks was very similar. I mean, they just kept jogging on the field. He would limit your special summon ability, and then any monster that you summoned that would threaten him, they would just use Spellbook of Fate, knowing that it doesn't target, so it's incredibly hard to stop, and so on, yada, yada, yada. So these decks rarely relied on traditional traps or battling monsters, and in my opinion, that really cheapened the battle phase, because it was like, well, this is not really how the game was intended on being played. That's changed. With those 2 decks out of the way, I think that traps are going to come back in a big way, especially now that Mirror Force is unlimited. Now, it's often said that the threat of Mirror Force is often scarier than the card itself, but just with the possibility of having the Mirror Force, in my opinion, I think that it's going to make players much more hesitant to rush everything into attack mode, and it's probably going to lead to longer games, which means that, you know, decks that get stronger as the game progresses, decks like Gladiator Beast, where you know, they can seemingly get back all their resources from their graveyard with cards like Darius and a Quest and, you know, so on and so forth. Or a deck like Tech Genesis, where when one TG dies, he just replaces himself with another TG, and when your whole TG engine is exhausted, okay, well, you just average everything back and then start the whole train over again. These are going to be the decks that benefit, these slower paced decks. And I also think if we have the Mirror Force cloud over our format, where people are less willing to throw everything to attack mode, risk everything on black, then you're also going to have these slower paced decks that aren't getting blown out the water by turn 2 and deemed unviable. And the last thing that I want to talk about is what I often call battle phase tricks, and that simply refers to damage step cards. And I mean, they were a tool that was completely absent last format for obvious reasons. I think that battle phase tricks are primed to be incredibly important this format. For one, they deal with the current biggest badass on the block, that being Evil Swarm Ophion, obviously. You look at Kalut, that card is unrestricted. Black Whirlwind is now at 2, so Black Wings got a little bit of a boost. Maybe they'll see more competitive play. Bujin is a fairly new deck. They also have Crane, which is currently unrestricted, so obviously that card can take down Ophion pretty easily. Fire Fist, at least the 4-access version, commonly plays 3 Forbidden Lands, and I personally think that Horn of the Phantom Beast is a card that should see a lot of play this format. I think that it could, you know, be really good this format. And then, of course, there's the granddaddy of them all. No, I'm not talking about the Rose Bowl. Gores, which is now semi-limited, and Gores is nearly identical to Mirror Force in terms of the effect that it has on how we conduct the battle phase. You know, how people will be a lot less reckless. They'll take less chances, and I think that you'll see way less OTK attempts. I mean, nobody's going to be willing to throw everything they have on the board when, you know, Mirror Force can completely eradicate everything that you do, when your opponent can drop that one Gores, and then it's like, oh shit, you know. Gores is one of those cards that completely can change the landscape of a duel. I mean, it's a complete tide turner. So I think with Gores kind of looming over the duel, always waiting to punish the player who plays so recklessly, you'll see people think their moves more thoroughly. I think there'll probably be a lot less autopilot decks. I think OTKs will be a lot less prevalent, and I mean, I don't know. I just feel like it's going to be healthier for the game. I mean, the battle phase actually being back is like, oh, woo, man. It's been a while since we've really had like a format with a healthy battle phase, and it looks like we might get one in this format. So let me know what you guys think. Hopefully we do end up getting a much slower format, because, you know, I really do miss control formats. I miss control decks, you know, and that's one of the reasons why I hated last format, because Evil Swarm was pretty much the only control deck that even had a shot at being, you know, a contender. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always, and take care. Subscribing makes life happy.